In 2010, a law is passed that revokes the citizenship for thousands of Palestinians, followed by 2012 another law being passed that effectively limits the number of Palestinian members of parliament to less than 10%. In 2014, Palestinian citizens are denied equal rights in the military and on getting college scholarships and being admitted to some public universities. These laws were created in the country of Jordan. In 1949 to 1956, all Palestinians were barred from schooling and employment. This country passing these laws was Egypt. 73 job categories are banned for Palestinian until 2010. Now, only 50 jobs are off limits to all Palestinians. Palestinians are still banned from working as physicians, journalists, pharmacists, and lawyers. They are not permitted to build new houses or properties or even repair their homes. These terrible laws against the Palestinians were passed in Lebanon. In 1991, 400,000 Palestinians were harassed and forced out of the country. This was Kuwait. And in 2005, Palestinians were subjected to abductions, hostage-takings, killings, tortures from armed groups. Politicians derided them, and 15,000 were forced to leave their country. Thousands stranded in camps in the desert while no Arab country would allow them to enter. This was the country of Iraq. In the 1970s, a law was passed that Palestinians could not vote, could not run for office, could not own any farmland, and could not have more than one property. This was followed by a law in 2005 to 2008 refusing to allow thousands of Palestinian Arab refugees fleeing from Iraq to enter their country. In 2012 to today, some 2,600 Palestinians were killed so far in their war. About 50 have starved to death as forces cut all food and water to a refugee camp. This is the modern-day Syria. These are the types of things that we expect from an apartheid state, creating and installing different rules and laws that punish one group based on their heritage or their background. In our last segment, we discovered how the state of Israel inadvertently gained responsibility over the West Bank and Gaza. We also saw how Palestinians were not given independence under the Arab nations that controlled them originally and promised them that independence. The first chance at independence was under the State of Israel, under the Oslo Accords. The Arabs who have accepted Israeli citizenship within the state have full equal rights and no restrictions to their freedoms. However, of course, in the West Bank is a different story. Area A is under full control of the Palestinian Authority. Obviously, this is not where an apartheid is taking place, since the Palestinians are being controlled by the Palestinians themselves. In Area B, the Palestinians have agreed under the Oslo Accord to maintain control over civil matters and laws while sharing responsibility of security with the Israelis. Any issues with the dual sets of laws would be the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian security forces who are in control. The only place left, of course, is Area C, where Israelis control both civil and security matters. The agreement under Oslo was eventually to trade land, Arab settlements going to the Arab state and Jewish settlements going to the Jewish state, and eventually turn over more control of this land to the Palestinian state. One thing that is often overlooked when discussing the Palestinians in the West Bank, we have to remember that they are not Israeli citizens and therefore have no rights as Israeli citizens. How is this, in theory, different than Israeli citizens who live in Area C being forbidden from entering Area A, or demanding Palestinian rights, or demanding that the Palestinian Authority should be providing them with services as non-citizens? Some people may suggest that these checkpoints are unfair or demeaning. Unfortunately, as the attacks on Israel increase, the requirement to find solutions to terrorism also increases. Oftentimes, Gaza is mentioned when trying to discuss the poor treatment of Palestinians. However, since 2005, Israel has had no presence in Gaza security-wise or politically. The area was under the control of the Palestinian Authority and the terrorist group Hamas until a civil war broke out between the two political parties that ended in war and death in the streets of Gaza. This led to the current poor government of Hamas, where all money is spent on terrorism versus improving the lives of the people of Gaza. As we can see, there is no apartheid within Israel for Israeli Arabs. The Palestinians are under control of their own government in areas A and B of the West Bank and in Gaza. Area C is under Israeli responsibility until a time where the Palestinian government can take control over the safety and security of the land. Even though the situation is not ideal and causes difficulties, it is definitely far from apartheid when we compare it to some of the other things we listed in the beginning of this segment. In the end, when we look at the history of the area of the Levant and how we have come to this current situation in the West Bank, we see that the Israelis never wanted to take control of the West Bank and Gaza. It was really forced upon them as a weapon used by the Arab nations who lost at conventional war. We have seen the same Arab nations persecute and treat these same people with hostility and punishment while projecting that on the state of Israel. We also see that Israel is the first state in history to actually provide the Palestinian people a chance at self-governance. This idea that the state of Israel has rules and laws restricting the rights of its civilians who are Palestinian is just outright false. They can look at the Israeli government and see that for the first time there's an Arab party controlling in a coalition government. We see a West Bank that is under control of their own government with the hope and plan to grow. We also see the same Palestinian government who has refused to call an election for over 15 years, still in power. The most recent, of course, being in 2021, that was yet again cancelled. There are a great deal of issues within the West Bank, and there are very complex problems that have to be solved. But we can safely say, looking at Israel, claiming that it's an apartheid state, while ignoring the facts that Israel is the only country who seems to be trying to make a Palestinian state, this is all just foolish. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast. And don't forget to check out our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.